Hey everyone, I'm Grace Parker. I'm 75 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil. This is the story of how a fancy senior living community nearly destroyed my life, stole my money, and almost killed me, and how I fought back and won. But first, let me paint you a picture of rock bottom. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. I'm clutching my chest as pain shoots down my left arm, and I'm crawling across my $5,000 a month luxury suite floor, gasping for help. The emergency call button? It's been temporarily out of service for 3 weeks. I'm banging on the walls, screaming for help, and you know what I hear back? Silence. Dead silence from a facility that promised 24/7 medical care, that my son paid $60,000 a year for, that marketed itself as a family. I lay there on that cold floor thinking I was going to die alone, abandoned, after giving them everything. But I didn't die. And what happened next? Well, that's a story worth telling. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before Sunset Manor turned me into a fighter. 53 years ago, I married my college sweetheart, Robert. We weren't rich. He was a mechanic. I was a school secretary, but we had dreams, big dreams. We wanted kids, a house with a white picket fence, family barbecues, the whole American dream. And for a while, we had it. Michael came first, my little businessman, even at 5 years old, always trying to make deals with his Halloween candy. Then James, my gentle giant who could fix anything electronic but couldn't kill a spider. Finally, Sarah, my firecracker daughter who decided at age 7 she was going to teach all the kids in the world. Our house on Maple Street wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. Robert would come home covered in grease, and I'd have dinner waiting. Homework around the kitchen table, bedtime stories, Saturday morning pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. We were that family everyone envied. The kids grew up too fast, like they always do. Michael got his business degree and started his own consulting firm. James became a software engineer. Still can't kill spiders, but he can code like nobody's business. Sarah got her teaching degree and married her high school sweetheart, Tom. Then came the grandkids. Oh, the grandkids. Michael gave us twins, Emma and Ethan. Sarah had little Lucy. James married late, but blessed us with baby Jake. Our house became the headquarters for every holiday, every birthday, every milestone. I was Grammy, the center of it all, and I loved every chaotic, beautiful minute. Robert and I would sit on our porch swing after these big family gatherings, exhausted but happy. He'd use the nickname only he was allowed to use, calling me Gracie, and tell me we did good. We did real good. But life has a way of changing everything in an instant. 2 years ago, Robert was under the hood of our neighbor's car. He never could retire from fixing things when he had a massive heart attack. By the time I found him, it was too late. 50 years of marriage, gone in a heartbeat. The house on Maple Street suddenly felt like a museum. Every corner held a memory. His coffee mug still sat in the same spot. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to move anything. The kids were devastated, of course, but they had their own lives to get back to. The daily phone calls became weekly check-ins. The weekend visits turned into monthly obligations. I understood. Grief is hard, and everyone processes it differently. But understanding didn't make the loneliness any easier. I started talking to myself just to hear a voice in the house. I'd make dinner for 2 out of habit, then stare at Robert's empty chair. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. reaching for him, only to find cold sheets. My 74th birthday came and went with a grocery store cake and a phone call from each kid. No party, no family gathering, just me, the cake, and memories of birthdays past. That's when the depression really hit. I stopped gardening. Robert's roses that he was so proud of started dying. I stopped cooking real meals. Why bother when you're eating alone? I stopped calling friends because what was I going to talk about? How empty my life had become. That's the woman my son found on my 75th birthday, broken, isolated, and fading away. My 75th birthday started like every other day for the past 2 years, with silence. I woke up, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. When did my hair get so white? When did these wrinkles get so deep? When did my eyes lose their spark? I shuffled to the kitchen and made coffee for one. The calendar on the fridge had a big red circle around today's date. I'd marked my own birthday because no one else would remember. But then, around noon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Michael standing there with the biggest bouquet of flowers I'd seen since Robert's funeral, and a grin that reminded me of his 7-year-old self on Christmas morning. He swept me into a hug that lifted me off my feet and announced it was my birthday, with the most amazing surprise for me. Something in his voice made my heart skip. For the first time in months, I felt a flutter of excitement. Michael sat me down on the couch, the same couch where we'd told the kids about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, and where Robert and I had shared 50 years of conversations. He explained that he'd been worried about me, as had the others. Living alone in this big house, isolated from people my age, no activities, no social life. It wasn't healthy. My excitement started to curdle into something else. He was right about my condition, but hearing it out loud stung. Sarah had found me crying in the grocery store last month because I couldn't reach something on the top shelf. James had called 3 times the week before, and I didn't answer because I was napping at 2 p.m. That wasn't fine. Michael had been researching and found what he called the perfect solution. He pulled out a glossy brochure that looked like it advertised luxury vacations, Sunset Manor Senior Living Community. The words hit me like a slap. Senior living. He wanted to put me in a home. But as he opened the brochure, I had to admit it was impressive. The cover showed a beautiful Spanish-style building surrounded by palm trees and perfectly manicured gardens. Seniors were laughing together, playing tennis, painting in bright art studios. Michael explained that this wasn't what I was thinking, not some depressing nursing home, but like a resort for active seniors. He flipped through pages showing a state-of-the-art fitness center, a library that looked like something from a movie, a dining room with actual tablecloths and wine glasses, and suites that were nicer than some hotels I'd stayed in. They offered yoga classes, book clubs, art workshops, even cooking classes with professional chefs. I could learn to paint like I always wanted. I could make friends with people who understood what I was going through. I stared at the photos of smiling seniors. They looked genuinely happy, not the forced smile happy you see in most retirement community ads, but genuinely joyful. When I asked about cost, Michael assured me not to worry. He, James, and Sarah had discussed it and could handle it together. I had sacrificed everything for them growing up, and now it was their turn to take care of me. The brochure listed activities I hadn't done in decades: gardening clubs, movie nights, day trips to museums and beaches, even dance classes. When was the last time I'd danced? Robert and I used to dance in the kitchen while dinner cooked. I expressed uncertainty about leaving the house where Robert and I had built our whole life. Michael responded that Dad was gone, and he wouldn't want me wasting away alone in a house full of memories. He'd want me living again. That hit hard because it was true. Robert always said life was for living, not for sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. I agreed to at least see the place first. Michael's face lit up as he revealed he'd already made an appointment for tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. Was I ready to leave the only home I'd known for 50 years? Was I ready to start over at 75? The next morning, Michael picked me up in his BMW. Always the successful businessman, even at 45. The drive to Sunset Manor took about 30 minutes through some of the nicest neighborhoods I'd ever seen. Michael mentioned that the location was perfect, close enough for family to visit regularly, but far enough that I'd feel independent. My first impression was, wow. The building looked like a luxury resort from the outside, all Spanish tile and palm trees, with a fountain in the center of the courtyard, where residents sat reading and chatting. A woman in a sharp navy suit met us at the entrance. Patricia Williams, the director of community relations, expressed excitement about showing me around. She was probably in her 40s, perfectly put together, with the kind of warm smile that made you feel like her most important client. Patricia led us through the main lobby, which looked like the inside of a 5-star hotel. Marble floors, fresh flowers everywhere, residents dressed nicely and chatting in small groups. Classical music played softly in the background. She explained that they currently had 200 residents, with a waiting list of over 100 people. Sunset Manor was considered one of the premier senior communities on the West Coast. We walked past the dining room, where residents were having lunch at tables with actual china and crystal glasses. The food looked restaurant quality, not the mystery meat I'd expected from institutional cooking. Patricia noted that their executive chef had trained at the Culinary Institute of America, and they prided themselves on fine dining. That night's menu included herb-crusted salmon and beef tenderloin. The fitness center was next, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It wasn't just exercise bikes and walkers. They had a full gym with personal trainers working with residents, a heated indoor pool with people doing water aerobics, and a spa area with massage chairs. Patricia explained they had a full-time physical therapist and 2 registered nurses on staff at all times. Health and wellness weren't just about medicine there. They were about living your best life. The library took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable reading chairs by large windows overlooking the gardens, and residents actually reading, not just sitting and staring at walls like I'd feared. But it was the art studio that really got to me. Residents were painting landscapes and portraits, laughing and helping each other. An instructor moved between easels, offering gentle guidance. I hadn't painted since high school, but suddenly I found myself imagining sitting at one of those easels. Patricia noticed my lingering and asked if I liked art. When I mentioned I used to paint a long time ago, she explained that their art instructor, Maria, was wonderful and taught everything from watercolors to oil painting to ceramics. Many residents discovered talents they never knew they had. We toured the beauty salon with actual hairstylists, the movie theater that showed current releases, and the game rooms where residents were playing bridge, chess, and something called Wii Bowling that looked ridiculously fun. Finally, Patricia showed us a model suite. I expected something institutional and depressing. Instead, I walked into what looked like a nice 1-bedroom apartment. Full kitchen, spacious living room, bedroom with a walk-in closet, and a bathroom with grab bars that were actually stylish instead of medical-looking. Patricia explained this was a Category A suite. Full independence, but with the security of knowing help was available 24/7 if needed. The best part was the balcony overlooking the gardens. I could see residents walking the paths, sitting on benches, tending to flower beds. It looked peaceful, happy. Patricia then introduced me to Linda Thompson, a resident about my age who was reading nearby. Linda looked like the kind of woman I'd want as a friend. Silver hair in a stylish cut, bright eyes, and a genuine smile. Linda shared that she'd been terrified when her daughter first suggested senior living, thinking it meant giving up independence. But honestly, it had been the best 8 months of her life. She'd been so lonely in her house after her husband passed, going days without talking to another soul. At Sunset Manor, she couldn't walk to the mailbox without having 3 conversations. She'd made more friends in 8 months than in the last 8 years. She told me about the book club she'd joined, the knitting circle where they made blankets for the local hospital, and the day trips they took to wineries and museums. When I asked about family visits, Linda explained that her family visited more than when she lived alone. Her daughter came for dinner twice a month, loving not having to cook. Her grandkids thought this place was like a hotel and actually asked to come visit Grammy at her cool house. That sealed it for me. The idea of my grandkids wanting to visit, of having friends to talk to, of learning new things. For the first time in 2 years, I felt hopeful. When I asked about next steps, Michael squeezed my hand and asked if I was sure. Looking around at the beautiful facility, thinking about Linda's story, imagining myself painting or reading in that gorgeous library, I was sure. 3 weeks later, moving day arrived. I'd spent those weeks sorting through 50 years of accumulation, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The hardest part was Robert's things. His clothes still smelled like his cologne. His tools were still arranged exactly how he liked them in the garage. Sarah helped me pack his photo albums and a few of his favorite shirts I couldn't bear to donate. She reminded me through tears that he'd want me to be happy and to start living again. Michael hired professional movers, but we all came to help. Even the grandkids were there. Emma and Ethan, now 12, treating it like an adventure. Lucy, 8, asking a million questions about Grammy's new house. And little Jake, just 3, more interested in the bubble wrap than the actual moving. As the movers loaded the truck, I took one last walk through the house on Maple Street. The kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents every year. The bedroom where all 3 kids had crawled into our bed during thunderstorms. But you know what? I didn't feel as sad as I expected. I felt ready for whatever came next. The drive to Sunset Manor felt different this time, not like going to an institution, but like going to a new adventure. Patricia met us in the lobby with a small welcome committee. Linda was there, along with 2 other residents and even some staff members. They'd made a welcome grace banner and everything. Linda gave me a genuine hug and expressed excitement that I was there, mentioning she'd been telling everyone about her new friend. My suite was on the 2nd floor with a view of the gardens. The movers were incredibly careful with my furniture. Robert's recliner, my grandmother's china cabinet, our wedding photo in its silver frame. Watching my life fit into this new space felt surreal, but right somehow. That first night, I sat on my new balcony as the sun set over the gardens. I could hear laughter from the courtyard below, see lights in other windows where my new neighbors were settling in for the evening. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel alone. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, I panicked. Where was I? Then I remembered. My new life was starting today. I got dressed and headed to the dining room for breakfast. The room was bustling with conversation and the clink of real silverware on real plates. Linda waved me over to her table and introduced me to her breakfast companions. Margaret, a retired teacher like Sarah, Bob, a former engineer like James in some ways, and Dorothy, who'd been a secretary like me. Dorothy asked what brought me to Sunset Manor, and I shared my story about losing Robert and the overwhelming loneliness that followed. They all nodded knowingly. Every single one had a similar story of loss and isolation. The conversation flowed naturally. as I mentioned my old interests in painting, reading, and gardening. It turned out Margaret ran the book club, Bob helped with the garden club, and everyone raved about Maria's art classes. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd have more activities than I could handle. After breakfast, Linda offered to show me around again, this time from a resident's perspective. She emphasized the importance of getting involved immediately, rather than hiding in your room like some residents did. We visited the library where Mrs. Patterson was organizing a new mystery novel discussion group. The art studio was next, where Maria welcomed me and showed me the supplies available during open studio hours every afternoon. The garden club was meeting that afternoon to plan spring plantings, and Bob invited me to join them. By dinner time, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I'd signed up for 3 activities, met at least a dozen people, and felt more energized than I had in months. The dinner was even more impressive than breakfast. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, and that perfectly prepared herb-crusted salmon Patricia had mentioned during my tour. Linda explained that the head chef, Ricardo, actually cared about his work, sourcing local ingredients and taking resident requests. After dinner, we watched a recent comedy in the theater. Sitting in the dark, laughing with people who got the same jokes I did, felt like being part of something again for the first time in 2 years. Those first 2 weeks felt like being reborn. I joined Margaret's book club and rediscovered my love of literature discussion. Maria's painting class awakened rusty hands that remembered how to hold a brush. The garden club welcomed me like I'd been a member for years. The friendships forming were the best part. Linda and I quickly bonded over our similar sense of humor. Margaret reminded me of my old teacher colleagues. Dorothy and I shared stories from our secretarial days, when everything was done on typewriters. When my family visited that second weekend, their relief was visible. I was animated again, telling them about my art class, the book we were discussing, and the roses Bob was teaching me to prune. Sarah commented that I looked 10 years younger, and I felt it too. The kids loved exploring the facility. Emma and Ethan made friends with other visiting grandchildren. Lucy spent an hour painting with Maria in the art studio. Even little Jake enjoyed toddling between the flower beds in the garden. Michael expressed that this was the right decision, and that Robert would be happy to see me like this. If only I'd known then what was coming, I might have paid more attention to the small warning signs already appearing. The decline started subtly with little things that were easy to dismiss or rationalize away. During my 3rd week, I bit into what should have been a fresh croissant and found it slightly stale. Linda noticed her eggs seemed rubbery that morning, too. We assumed the chef was having an off day, but it happened again the next day, and the day after that. Margaret mentioned during book club that she'd noticed the food quality slipping. Yesterday's chicken had been so dry she could barely chew it. Dorothy admitted she'd thought the same thing about the overcooked salmon. The second warning sign was staffing changes. Carla, the cheerful activities coordinator who'd helped me get involved, suddenly disappeared without announcement or goodbye. Her replacement was a tired-looking woman named Janet who seemed overwhelmed and uninterested. When I asked about adding a ceramics class mentioned during my tour, she barely looked up from her paperwork and mumbled about looking into it. That was 6 weeks ago. I'm still waiting. Housekeeping became sporadic, too. My suite was supposed to be cleaned twice a week, but increasingly, my housekeeper would show up a day late or sometimes not at all. She apologized about being short-staffed and covering twice as many rooms as before. Maintenance issues started small but multiplied. A hallway light bulb burned out and stayed dark for 2 weeks. The elevator developed a strange grinding noise that got worse daily. The pool temperature dropped noticeably, making water aerobics uncomfortable for older residents. We were all still in our honeymoon phase, dismissing these as growing pains from the new wing that had opened the previous year. Linda suggested they were probably still figuring out logistics. Then came the incident with Mrs. Henderson that changed everything. Mrs. Henderson was 89, a sweet woman who'd been at Sunset Manor for 3 years. She knew everyone's name, always had a kind word, and never complained about anything. One Tuesday afternoon, she fell in her bathroom and couldn't get up. She pressed her emergency call button, the one we all wore around our necks that was supposed to bring help immediately. 45 minutes later, her neighbor heard her calling for help through the wall. When maintenance finally arrived, Mrs. Henderson was dehydrated, confused, and had been lying on the cold bathroom floor for nearly an hour. The administration's response was corporate speak about system glitches and looking into it. Mrs. Henderson spent 2 days in the hospital with a minor concussion. Margaret whispered to me after we visited her that it could have been any of us, wondering what would happen if it was nighttime with no one around to hear. But the administration's response bothered me most. No apology to Mrs. Henderson, no explanation to residents about what went wrong or how they'd prevent it again. Just meaningless phrases about system improvements and reviewing protocols. That night, I called Michael to share my concerns about Mrs. Henderson, the food quality, and mounting maintenance issues. He suggested these sounded like isolated incidents, and that every place has problems sometimes. When he asked if I wanted to move back home, the thought of returning to that empty house and the loneliness made me realize I didn't want to leave. I just wanted them to fix these problems. Michael was right that we were paying premium prices for premium care. A few of us decided to approach Patricia Williams about our concerns. That meeting would be our first real glimpse of what Sunset Manor was actually becoming. Linda, Margaret, Bob, Dorothy, and I requested a meeting with Patricia Williams to discuss our mounting concerns. It took 3 weeks to get on her calendar. Apparently, she was very busy with new admissions and budget planning. The delay itself felt like a red flag. When we finally gathered in her office, the woman who had been so warm and welcoming during my initial tour was noticeably different. She maintained her professional polish, but there was an unmistakable coldness that hadn't been there before. She didn't offer us coffee or even water, and her smile seemed forced. Bob, ever the organized engineer, had prepared a detailed list of our concerns. He methodically outlined the declining food quality, the maintenance delays, and emphasized that the emergency response incident with Mrs. Henderson was completely unacceptable for a facility charging premium rates. Patricia's response was pure corporate damage control. She acknowledged our concerns with empty phrases about taking all feedback seriously, but then quickly shifted to reminding us that Sunset Manor served over 200 residents. And with that volume, occasional hiccups were inevitable. When Margaret pointed out that Mrs. Henderson could have died, Patricia dismissed it as an unfortunate but resolved situation. The most telling moment came when Linda tried to appeal to Patricia's humanity, explaining that we loved living at Sunset Manor and simply wanted the standards to match what we'd been promised and were paying for. Patricia's response was chilling. She reminded us that living in a community meant adapting to changes as the community grew and evolved, and that we needed to maintain realistic expectations. That phrase haunted me for days afterward. What exactly was realistic about expecting edible food when paying $5,000 a month? What was realistic about expecting life-saving emergency services to actually work? After that meeting, I began observing everything with new eyes. The patterns became impossible to ignore. The dining staff had clearly been reduced. Where 3 servers used to handle the evening meal, now 2 struggled to cover the same number of tables. Food sat under heat lamps longer, becoming dried out and overcooked. The quality degradation wasn't accidental, it was systematic cost-cutting. Ricardo, the talented head chef who had been such a major selling point, had vanished without explanation. No announcement, No farewell celebration. He was simply gone. His replacement seemed focused entirely on quantity over quality, serving dishes that looked institutional rather than restaurant caliber. The locally sourced ingredients disappeared, replaced with obvious bulk purchases from food service suppliers. The activities program suffered similar cuts. The popular wine tasting events stopped entirely. Museum trips became less frequent and were limited to fewer participants. When residents inquired about missing programs, Janet's standard response involved vague references to budget constraints and prioritization. Watching how these changes affected my friends was heartbreaking. Margaret, who had been so vibrant and social when I arrived, began spending increasing amounts of time alone in her room. She saw no point in attending dinner when the food had become nearly inedible. Dorothy stopped participating in exercise classes because half the equipment was broken and no physical therapist was available to help with modifications. Bob quit the garden club in frustration when the administration refused to approve necessary soil amendments and plant purchases. The community spirit that had drawn me to Sunset Manor was evaporating. Residents who had once gathered in the lobby for impromptu conversations now hurried past with downcast eyes. The dining room, once filled with animated discussions and laughter, became a place where people ate quickly and left. 3 months after that disastrous meeting with Patricia, I experienced firsthand just how dangerous Sunset Manor had become. It was a Tuesday night around 3 a.m. when I woke up with crushing chest pain that radiated down my left arm. Having been married to a man who died of a heart attack, I recognized the symptoms immediately. I tried to reach for my emergency call button, but the pain was so intense that I could barely move. When I finally managed to press it, nothing happened. I pressed it again and again, each time expecting to hear the reassuring voice of the night nurse through the intercom. Instead, there was only silence. The call button system that Patricia had assured us was fully functional had been malfunctioning for weeks. Some residents reported their buttons weren't working. Others said the response times had increased dramatically. But the administration kept insisting these were isolated technical glitches being addressed. As I lay there clutching my chest, I realized I was completely alone. The pain was getting worse, and I began to panic. I tried to get to my phone to call 911 directly, but I couldn't stand up. I started crawling across my suite floor, each movement sending waves of agony through my chest. I began banging on the walls, hoping my neighbor would hear me. I called out as loudly as I could, but my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The soundproofing that had seemed like such a luxury feature when I moved in now felt like a death trap. For what felt like hours, I lay on that cold floor, convinced I was going to die alone and forgotten. The facility that had promised 24-hour medical supervision and immediate emergency response had abandoned me in my moment of greatest need. I thought about Robert, about my children, about all the things I'd never get to say to them. Finally, around 5 a.m., my neighbor Mrs. Chen heard something and came to check on me. She found me semi-conscious on my bathroom floor and immediately called 911 from her own phone. The paramedics arrived within minutes and rushed me to the hospital, where I was diagnosed with a mild heart attack. I spent 4 days in the cardiac unit, during which time exactly 2 people from Sunset Manor bothered to check on me. Linda and Margaret, both residents like myself. No administrator, no nurse, no staff member of any kind contacted me or my family to inquire about my condition or offer support. When I returned to Sunset Manor, I expected at least a conversation about what had gone wrong with my emergency call button. Instead, I found a generic incident report slip under my door requesting that I fill out paperwork describing what happened. The tone was bureaucratic and defensive, more concerned with liability protection than resident safety. That's when I knew I had to get out, and I wasn't going alone. My heart attack was the wake-up call I needed to see Sunset Manor for what it really was, a profit-driven business that had stopped caring about its residents' well-being. But I also realized that simply complaining wouldn't accomplish anything. If we wanted to escape our contracts and expose their negligence, we needed irrefutable evidence. Linda had reached the same conclusion after watching my near-death experience. Margaret, Bob, and Dorothy were equally fed up with the deteriorating conditions. We formed an unlikely investigative team, 5 seniors armed with smartphones and determination to document everything. We started systematically photographing our meals, showing overcooked vegetables, moldy bread, and portions that had clearly been sitting under heat lamps for hours. Margaret, with her teacher's attention to detail, created detailed logs of every maintenance request we submitted and how long it took to address them, if they were addressed at all. Bob used his engineering background to document safety violations. He photographed broken handrails, non-functioning emergency lighting, and elevator mechanical issues that violated basic safety codes. Dorothy, drawing on her secretarial experience, began keeping meticulous records of every interaction with staff, noting dates, times, and exact responses to our concerns. I focused on the medical negligence aspect, documenting the broken call button system and the lack of qualified medical staff during overnight shifts. We discovered that Sunset Manor had been operating with only 1 LPN on duty for the entire facility during night hours, completely inadequate for 200 residents, many of whom had serious health conditions. The more we investigated, the more damning our evidence became. We found that several other residents had experienced emergency call button failures, but had been too intimidated to complain formally. 3 residents had been hospitalized in the past 2 months, all after significant delays in receiving emergency assistance. We also discovered financial irregularities. Despite the declining service quality, Sunset Manor had actually raised monthly fees for new residents by 15% over the past year. They were charging premium prices while systematically cutting costs in ways that endangered residents' health and safety. Our breakthrough came when we learned about other residents' experiences. Mrs. Patterson, the former librarian, had been keeping her own informal records of resident complaints and had noticed patterns of neglect that went back months. Mr. Williams, a retired lawyer, had actually been researching consumer protection laws related to senior living facilities. Together, we assembled a comprehensive case file that included hundreds of photographs, detailed incident reports, medical records, and witness statements from over 30 residents. We had documentation of negligent medical care, safety violations, false advertising, and breach of contract on multiple levels, but building the evidence was only half the battle. We still needed to figure out how to use it effectively, to secure our releases and potentially help other residents who couldn't or wouldn't fight for themselves. Armed with our evidence, we requested another meeting with Patricia Williams, but this time we made it clear that this wasn't a complaint session. It was a business negotiation. We also insisted that the facility's legal counsel be present, which immediately got their attention. The meeting took place in the main conference room, with Patricia, the facility lawyer, and the regional operations manager all in attendance. The power dynamic was completely different from our previous encounter. Instead of being dismissed as complaining seniors, we were suddenly being taken very seriously. Bob presented our evidence with the precision of a courtroom attorney. He laid out photographs, incident reports, and documentation in chronological order, building an undeniable case of systematic negligence and breach of contract. The administrators' faces grew increasingly pale as they realized the scope of what we documented. The most powerful moment came when I presented my medical records from the heart attack, alongside the incident reports showing the emergency call button system had been malfunctioning for weeks before my crisis. The facility's lawyer immediately understood the liability implications. If I had died because of their negligent maintenance of safety systems, Sunset Manor could have faced wrongful death litigation. Margaret presented evidence of false advertising, showing how the current reality of life at Sunset Manor bore no resemblance to the luxury experience promised in their marketing materials. Dorothy documented the systematic reduction in staffing and services, while fees continued to increase. Linda delivered the knockout punch by presenting signed statements from over 30 residents documenting similar experiences with neglect, safety violations, and declining care standards. The pattern was undeniable. Sunset Manor was systematically defrauding its residents. Our demands were straightforward: immediate release from our contracts with no penalties, full refund of any prepaid fees, and a commitment to address the safety and care issues we'd identified. We made it clear that if these demands weren't met within 48 hours, our documentation would be forwarded to the State Attorney General's office, the Department of Health, and several local news outlets. The transformation in their attitude was remarkable. Patricia, who had been so dismissive in our previous meeting, was now apologetic and accommodating. The lawyer was clearly advising immediate compliance to avoid bigger legal problems. The operations manager was already making notes about damage control and remediation efforts. Within 24 hours, we had signed releases terminating our contracts with no financial penalties. More importantly, Sunset Manor agreed to conduct a comprehensive review of their safety systems and staffing levels. While we couldn't force them to return to their original standards of care, we had at least ensured that the most dangerous conditions would be addressed. Walking out of Sunset Manor for the last time was one of the most liberating experiences of my life. Linda, Margaret, Bob, Dorothy, and I had not only secured our own freedom, but had potentially saved lives by forcing the facility to address critical safety issues. The victory felt even sweeter because we'd achieved it through our own efforts. At 75, I had learned that age doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or being powerless against corporate negligence. We had proven that seniors with determination and organization could fight back against exploitation and win. I'm 75 years old, and I'm done being anyone's easy target. Age is just a number, and it's never too late to fight for yourself. If this helped you, please like this video and subscribe our channel.